When I needed $7,200 to stay alive, my rich son told me to ask his sister. The morning my cardiologist told me I needed surgery within 3 weeks. My son had just posted a photograph of himself leaning against a brand new Mercedes with the caption, "Built this life from nothing." 2 hours later, I called him from the hospital parking garage and asked if he could lend me $7,200 to cover what my insurance would not. He went quiet, then said, "Dad, I can't keep paying for the consequences of your bad decisions." He had never paid one of them. My wife, Diane, did not defend me. She said, "Ask Brenna. She has that wedding fund sitting there, and teachers don't need some huge wedding anyway." Brenna was my 27-year-old daughter. She taught 5th grade, drove a 12-year-old Honda, and had spent 3 years saving $9,000 for a small October wedding. That evening, she showed up at my house, put her entire wedding envelope on the kitchen table, and said, "We can get married anywhere. I only get one dad." 4 months later, the piece of land my family had mocked me for keeping was sold to a medical research developer for $4.8 million. Suddenly, my wife remembered we had been married 31 years. Suddenly, my son started calling me Dad instead of the financial disaster I grew up with. And at Thanksgiving, the same people who had told me Brenna's wedding money was expendable sat across from me, demanding to know why I had paid off her student loans, bought her a house, and refused to give my son $1. I did not scream. I did not threaten anyone. I simply asked Luke one question. When I needed $7,200 to stay alive, what did you tell me my life was worth? My name is Michael Warren. I was 59 when this happened, and until that year, I had spent almost a decade believing the worst thing a man could become was a disappointment to his family. I live outside Dayton, Ohio, in a 3-bedroom ranch house with a cracked driveway and a maple tree that drops enough leaves every October to make me question why God invented rakes. I am not glamorous. I am not secretly a billionaire. I spent most of my adult life running a small commercial landscaping and irrigation company called Warren Grounds. We handled apartment complexes, medical offices, schools, and a handful of nicer developments around Southwest Ohio. At our best, I had 19 employees, 3 crews, 6 trucks, and enough work that Diane used to complain I smelled like fertilizer even after showering. We were never rich, but we were comfortable. Luke grew up with club soccer, decent vacations, and a used truck when he turned 17. Brenna took dance lessons, art classes, and enough school supplies to outfit a small library. Diane handled the office side of the company for several years before moving into medical billing when the business got bigger than she liked. If you had asked me at 45 what my future looked like, I would have told you I planned to sell Warren Grounds around 60, travel with my wife, spoil grandchildren, and complain about my back from somewhere warm. Then I bought 26 acres outside New Albany, Ohio. That decision became the family curse. At the time, it looked brilliant. A regional road extension had been approved. Distribution centers and medical companies were moving east of Columbus. The property sat less than 2 miles from a planned interchange, and a developer I knew told me industrial land would explode once construction began. I used almost everything I had outside our house and retirement accounts to buy it. Diane supported the purchase. I need that said clearly, because years later she rewrote the story until it sounded like I had sneaked out one night and gambled our future on swampland. She went with me to see it. She stood beside the old barn and said, "If this works, Luke and Brenna never have to worry about money." It did not work. 6 months after closing, an environmental review discovered chemical contamination from an abandoned plating operation that had existed on neighboring acreage in the 70s. Nothing dramatic happened on my property. No barrels appeared, no green water bubbled out of the ground. But groundwater testing triggered state restrictions, lenders backed away, and the road project shifted almost a mile east while cleanup studies dragged on. My 26 acres became impossible to develop and difficult to sell. I still owed taxes and loan payments. Warren Grounds had already guaranteed part of the purchase. So when 2 major landscaping clients failed to renew during the recession that followed, everything tightened at once. I sold equipment, cut staff, took every small job I could. Eventually, I closed the company. I paid every employee. I paid my vendors. I lost almost everything else I had built. The land remained because nobody wanted it at a price that covered what I owed. I took a facilities job at a distribution center near Vandalia, working maintenance and overnight equipment checks. I went from signing payroll for 19 men to unclogging floor drains at 2 in the morning. I was grateful for the work. My family was not. Diane never said she hated me after the business failed. She did something slower. She began speaking about my decisions as if they explained every disappointment in our lives. If the refrigerator broke, this wouldn't be stressful if we still had the company. If we skipped vacation, we used to be able to do things before the land. If Luke complained about student loans, Diane would say, "Your father had plans for that money." I carried the guilt because some of it belonged to me. I had made the investment. I had believed the road project. I had risked too much on a timeline I could not control. What took me years to understand was that accountability and permanent humiliation are not the same thing. Luke was 22 when the business closed. He had just graduated from Ohio State and entered software sales. He was angry about everything. His friends were taking graduation trips, and he was working. He had expected me to help with a down payment on a condo. I could not. Diane told him she understood why he felt betrayed. The word betrayed surprised me then. It became his favorite later. Luke built a successful career anyway. By 32, he worked enterprise sales for a cloud security company and earned more in commissions during a good quarter than I made in a year at the distribution center. I was proud of him. I told people that constantly. Luke interpreted his success differently. To him, every accomplishment proved he had escaped the financial mess I created. He talked about being self-made even though he had lived at home rent-free until 25, used my old company truck for 2 years, and accepted $15,000 from Diane's mother for his first condo. I never corrected the story because fathers often protect their children's pride long after those children stop protecting ours. Brenna was different. She had been 19 when Warren Grounds closed. She remembered enough of the good years to understand that I had once worked 70-hour weeks to provide them. She had also been home during the worst months. She saw me sell my fishing boat. She saw me come inside after letting the final crew go and sit in the garage because I did not want my employees to watch me cry. She never treated the failure like a moral disease. Brenna studied elementary education, became a teacher in Kettering, and lived within her means. She was engaged to a high school history teacher named Eli Matthews, a decent young man with terrible handwriting and the patience to listen to my stories about irrigation systems. Their wedding was planned for October at a converted barn outside Xenia. Nothing extravagant, 80 guests, barbecue, string lights. Brenna had saved $9,000 over 3 years because she refused to begin marriage with wedding debt. Diane thought the wedding was too simple. Luke joked that it looked like a Pinterest recession special. Brenna laughed. I did not. The distance in my marriage became harder to ignore around then. Diane had spent years moving emotionally toward Luke. He represented proof that the family could still look successful. She loved visiting his downtown Columbus condo, taking pictures at rooftop restaurants, telling church friends about his accounts and bonuses. When Brenna received Teacher of the Year recognition at her school, Diane posted one sentence online. When Luke closed a major corporate contract, she posted 11 photographs and wrote that perseverance ran in the family. My name did not appear in the caption. I wish I could say I had enough self-respect not to notice. I noticed every time. I simply told myself jealousy was ugly and swallowed it. Then my health forced everything into the open. I had been tired for months, not normal tired, walking upstairs and needing to sit down tired. My chest occasionally tightened while I was lifting things at work. I blamed age, night shifts, and the 20 pounds I had gained since closing the business. One afternoon, I nearly passed out beside a conveyor line. My supervisor drove me to urgent care, which sent me to a cardiologist. Tests showed severe blockage in 2 coronary arteries and another partial blockage. The doctor recommended surgery soon. He was calm when he explained it, which somehow made everything scarier. Weeks, Michael, not months. My insurance covered most of the procedure, but between the deductible, hospital deposit, and several costs tied to the surgical team, I needed roughly $7,200 before everything could be scheduled. I had some savings, not enough. My credit cards were still high from years of cleaning up the land debt. Diane had a retirement account through work, but when I asked whether we could use part of our emergency savings, she told me there was barely $4,000 left because she had helped Luke with furnishing his new condo the previous year and had been covering part of her mother's assisted living expenses. I thought Luke paid for the condo stuff. He paid most. How much did you give him? Her mouth tightened. This is not the time. Apparently, it is exactly the time. Michael, don't start keeping score while we're talking about surgery. I remember staring at her because I was not keeping score. I was trying to understand why my wife had more urgency when our son wanted a dining table than when her husband needed an operating room. The next morning, she received a call from Luke while we were eating breakfast. His voice came through the speaker for a moment before she turned it down. He had closed a huge account, nearly $12 million in contracted software over several years, with a commission large enough that he had apparently ordered a new Mercedes the same week. Diane lit up. I knew you could do it. She asked about the car, asked about his celebratory dinner, told him his grandfather would have been proud. I sat across from her holding medical paperwork. When she ended the call, I said, I'm going to ask Luke for the hospital money. She looked almost offended. Michael, it's a loan. He just started getting ahead. He has been getting ahead for years. You know how he feels about money in this family. I need heart surgery. Diane folded her napkin. Then ask Brenna first. I genuinely thought I had misheard. What? She has savings. Her wedding savings. It's a wedding, Michael. This is medical. Exactly. Then why are you making that face? Because Luke has more money than either of us has seen in years. And he earned it. There was so much inside those 3 words I could barely breathe around them. And Brenna didn't earn hers? That's not what I meant. What did you mean? Diane stood and carried her plate to the sink. Luke has worked very hard to separate himself from the financial instability he grew up with. I don't want you dragging him back into it every time something goes wrong. Heart surgery is not another bad investment. She closed her eyes. I know that. Do you? She turned. Ask him if you want. Just don't be shocked if he says no. I did ask. I sat in my truck after work that afternoon because I could not bring myself to make the call from inside the house. Luke answered, sounding distracted. Music and restaurant noise filled the background. Dad, what's up? I need a favor. He gave a quiet sigh before I had explained anything. That hurt more than I expected. I told him about the blockage, the surgery, the money. He was silent for maybe 5 seconds. 70. 200? Yes. And you need it when? By Friday if they're going to hold the surgical date. Another pause. Dad, I don't know. It's a loan, Luke. That's what everything is at first. I stared through the windshield. What does that mean? It means I spent my 20s watching Mom stress because you made one financial disaster after another. I finally get to a place where I'm not worried about money every second, and now suddenly I'm supposed to fund your problems too. This is my heart. I know what it is. Then talk to me like you know. His voice became colder. I can't keep underwriting consequences for you. What consequence caused blocked arteries? You know what I mean. No, I actually don't. Someone near him laughed. Luke covered the phone briefly, then came back. Ask the hospital about a payment plan. Or ask Brenna. She's the one who's always defending you. There it was. I did not yell. Okay. He sounded surprised. Okay? Enjoy dinner. Dad, don't do that guilt thing. I said enjoy dinner. I ended the call. I sat there for almost 20 minutes. I had spent years imagining that if something truly serious happened, all the old resentment would fall away. I had believed family conflict was like bad weather. Ugly until an emergency made everyone remember the roof mattered. I was wrong. Sometimes emergencies do not repair relationships. They reveal their actual condition. Brenna found out because Diane told her. Not kindly. Apparently Diane called and said, your father needs surgery and is too proud to ask you after Luke turned him down. Brenna called me immediately. Why didn't you tell me? Because you have a wedding. Dad, you saved that money. Dad, Brenna, no. Meet me at Miller's Diner at 6. I'm working. Then 7:30. Brenna. 7:30. She hung up. I arrived at the diner still wearing my work shirt. Eli sat beside her. Before I even slid into the booth, Brenna pushed an envelope toward me. No. Sit down. I'm not taking your wedding fund. You are not taking my wedding fund. She opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000. I moved the rest into checking this afternoon. Eli and I canceled the barn. My stomach dropped. You what? Eli leaned forward. We're getting married at my parents' church and doing dinner at the community hall. No. Mr. Warren, he said, I want to marry Brenna. I don't care what room we do it in. Brenna took my hand. The venue refunded most of the deposit because we were still outside 90 days. We have $7,500 available between that and our emergency fund. This is your wedding. And you are my father. You've been saving for 3 years. Then I'm good at saving. I can do it again. I could not speak. She squeezed my hand harder. Dad, look at me. I did. You are not dying because I wanted string lights, I cried. Right there beside a sugar dispenser and a laminated menu advertising all-day breakfast. Eli looked away to give me dignity. Brenna did not. She let me cry. That was the moment something inside me changed. Not toward Luke yet, toward myself. I had spent years accepting the family story that I was the person who lost things. I had lost a business, lost savings, lost status, lost my wife's respect. Sitting across from my daughter, I realized I had also raised a woman who understood that love was not measured by whether helping someone improved your own life. I had not failed at everything. The surgery happened 8 days later. Brenna and Eli arrived before dawn. Diane came too, but she spent most of the pre-op period answering messages from Luke because he had an important client meeting. He sent me a text. Good luck today. Keep me posted. No call, no visit. I remember looking at those 4 words and feeling almost nothing. The anesthesiologist asked me to count backward. The next thing I knew, Brenna was beside the bed crying and laughing at the same time. The operation had gone well. Recovery hurt more than I expected. Brenna insisted I stay in her 2-bedroom apartment because Diane said she could not miss more than a few days of work, and our house had stairs to the basement laundry. I slept in Brenna's spare room for 3 weeks. Every morning, she left for school at 6:30. Eli made coffee before leaving for his own job. Every afternoon, one of them returned with groceries or medicine. They never acted like I was ruining anything. On my 4th day there, I noticed Brenna's car was gone and asked whether it was in the shop. I sold it. I stared at her. Why? We needed a little more cushion after the surgery expenses. How are you getting to work? Eli drops me off in the morning. I take the bus home. I became so angry I had to sit down. You sold your car. It had 180,000 miles. You needed it. You needed surgery more. Brenna, Dad, stop trying to make me regret loving you. That sentence broke something open in me. 2 weeks later, the letter arrived. Not from the hospital, from a development company called Northline Biomedical Properties. Before I opened it, I opened another envelope from the Ohio Environmental Office. After almost 11 years of remediation and monitoring, the restriction on my new Albany property had been lifted. Soil and groundwater levels met the required standards. The land could be transferred and developed again. I read the letter twice. Then I opened Northline's. The road project had not vanished after all. It had shifted east, but an enormous medical research campus was now planned less than a mile from my acreage, and Northline wanted the land for laboratory support buildings and parking. Their offer was $4.8 million. I sat at Brenna's kitchen table for a long time, not cheering, not calling anyone, just staring at the number and then at the bus pass hanging from a hook beside her keys. 11 years earlier, Diane had called the property Michael's Monument to Failure. Luke had joked at Christmas that I should put a sign on it saying, "Future home of Dad's bad decisions." Brenna had never laughed. Now the bad decision was worth more money than I had earned in my entire life. I did not call Diane first. I called the one person who had never treated my failures like permission to stop seeing me as human. Brenna? Dad, I'm teaching. Call me at lunch. Are you okay? I'm okay. At 12:15, she called from her classroom. I told her. Silence. Then she whispered, 4.8 million? Yes. Are you sure? Unless someone typed too many zeros. She started laughing, then crying. Dad, I know. What are you going to do? I looked around her apartment, the cheap blinds, the second-hand dining table, the stack of wedding invitations she had not yet reprinted. First, I'm buying you a car. No, that was not a question. Dad. Second, I am paying back every dollar you and Eli spent on the surgery. Also no. Third, I'm going to sit down with a financial advisor before I do anything else, because apparently I have already demonstrated how dangerous I can be around land. She laughed so loudly one of her students must have heard through the hallway. We kept the news private while I reviewed the offer and considered what I wanted. I did not need revenge. I needed stability. I sold the land. After taxes, old debts, and fees, I had a little over $3.5 million available. Enough to retire, enough to breathe. Enough that nobody could ever again tell me a $7,200 hospital deposit was larger than my life. I paid off my remaining mortgage. I replaced Brenna's car with a reliable new Subaru she protested about for 2 weeks. I paid off her and Eli's student loans, roughly $78,000 combined. I bought a modest three-bedroom house 15 minutes from their schools and placed it in Brenna's name as a wedding gift. Not a mansion, not a reward for loyalty, a home. One place where she could begin married life without debt pressing against every decision. I also reimbursed every dollar from their wedding fund, then added enough that they could choose whatever wedding they wanted. They still chose the church and community hall. "We like it now," Brenna said. "Also, Eli's aunt already volunteered to make 400 meatballs and she scares me." I laughed. The rest went into retirement accounts, conservative investments, and a fund I established for myself. I was 59, not dead. I had spent enough years treating my future as a family resource. I wanted to live some of it. Diane learned about the sale from Luke before I could decide how to tell her. Property transfers are public information, and Luke apparently monitored commercial development as part of his work. I was back at our house by then, moving carefully but recovering well. Diane came home one Tuesday holding her phone. "You sold the New Albany land." It was not a question. "Yes, for $4.8 million. "Yes." She stared at me. "And you did not tell your wife." "We have barely spoken beyond medical appointments in months." "That is not an answer." "It is mine. Michael, we have been married 31 years. "I remember." "Then how could you make a decision like this without me?" I almost admired the reversal. For 11 years, the land had been my mistake. The moment it became valuable, it became our marriage. "What did you want me to do? Ask permission to accept the offer?" "I wanted partnership." I looked at her. "So did I." She sat down at the kitchen table. "How much is left after everything?" There it was. Not how did it feel after 11 years. Not are you scared after surgery? Numbers. Enough. That is not a number. It does not need to be. Her face hardened. "Luke says you bought Brenna a house." "I did." "And paid off her loans." "Yes." "Do you hear yourself?" "Very clearly. You are punishing our son." "I have not taken anything from Luke. You gave his sister hundreds of thousands of dollars. I gave my daughter a home and paid debts because she paid for your surgery." "Partly." Diane laughed bitterly. "So this is what we're doing now? Whoever performs the biggest emotional gesture gets the biggest inheritance?" "No one is talking about inheritance. Michael, you are almost 60. Thank you for the update." "You know what I mean." I did. They were already doing math around my death. I had seen that pattern before in other families, and never imagined I would recognize it in my own kitchen. Diane called me cruel. She said Luke had responsibilities, clients, a mortgage, and a lifestyle tied to professional expectations. Brenna could afford to help because her life was simpler. That sentence brought me back to the morning Diane had told me to ask our daughter for wedding money. Why is Brenna's money always available to the family, but Luke's money belongs to Luke? Diane stared at me. "That's not fair." "Answer it." "Because Luke has worked very hard for what he has. Brenna teaches 30 children every day." "You know that's not what I mean." "Then explain it better." She could not. Luke called an hour later. "Dad, we need to talk." "We are talking." "Mom says you bought Brenna a house." "Correct." "Are you serious?" "Very." "That land sale was family money." I sat back. "Interesting." "What?" "When it was contaminated, you called it my disaster. When I needed surgery, you called the cost another consequence of my bad decisions. Now the bad decision pays off, and suddenly it belongs to the family." "That is not what I said." "It is exactly the pattern." He lowered his voice. "I was angry when you called from the hospital. You were having dinner. I was celebrating the biggest deal of my career. I know, you dropped surgery on me in the middle of it. Was there a more convenient time for my blocked arteries?" "Dad, stop." "I am not doing anything. You are obviously giving Brenna everything to make a point." I gave Brenna something, because she had already shown me what her priorities were when nobody knew a land sale was coming. "So now I'm a bad son forever because I didn't hand you $7,200 on demand?" I thought about that. "No, you are my son. But I learned something about our relationship that day." "And what's that?" "You believe my need became less legitimate because you were still angry at who I used to be?" Silence. "I can forgive that." I cannot pretend I did not hear it. Luke hung up. The family pressure started immediately. Diane's sister called. A cousin messaged me on Facebook. Luke told people I was financially manipulating the kids after a health scare. I said nothing publicly. I had no interest in making relatives choose teams. Then Thanksgiving arrived. Brenna and Eli were supposed to host at their new house because they wanted the first holiday there before the wedding. I told her she did not have to invite Diane and Luke. Dad, I'm not using Thanksgiving as punishment. You might regret that. Probably. But if it gets ugly, I have my own front door now. Fair point. Diane came carrying 2 pies and the expression of a woman attending negotiations. Luke arrived in the Mercedes with his girlfriend, Madison, whom I had met twice. I liked her more than he deserved that year. For the first hour, everyone behaved. Brenna showed Diane the kitchen. Eli carved turkey. Luke complimented the house in a tone that sounded like an appraisal. This place must have been what, $450? Brenna said. Something like that. Nice gift. Dad wanted to. Luke gave me a tight smile. I bet. We sat down. Brenna had placed old family photographs on a shelf near the dining room, including one from when Warren Grounds still existed. Luke and I stood beside a company truck, both sunburned, both smiling. I barely recognized the uncomplicated relationship in that picture. Halfway through dinner, Diane asked whether I had made a long-term plan for the rest of the land money. I put down my fork. Brenna closed her eyes. Mom. What? We are all adults. Luke said. It's a reasonable question. Eli stared at his mashed potatoes with the concentration of a man trying not to become part of someone else's family war. I said, yes, I have a plan. Luke leaned forward. And? I plan to live. He sighed. Dad? What? No one is saying you can't enjoy it. Generous. Diane said, Michael, stop being defensive. We just need to know you are not making emotional decisions. I laughed softly. The same emotional decisions that bought this house? You know what I mean. Everybody keeps saying that when they do not want to explain themselves. Luke set down his glass. Fine. I'll explain. I'm 32. I've worked my ass off. I'm finally at a point where I can invest in some bigger opportunities. I'm looking at buying into a small cybersecurity consultancy with 2 guys from work. If you're giving family money away, I could actually use capital for something that grows. Brenna stared at him. You refused Dad's surgery money. Here we go. No, seriously. I knew somebody would make Thanksgiving about that. I said, you just asked me for investment money during Thanksgiving. I'm talking about something productive. The word sat there. Productive. Brenna's wedding fund had been disposable. My surgery had been consequences. Luke's investment was productive. How much? I asked. His expression changed. He had expected resistance, not curiosity. 200,000, Diane said quickly. It's not a handout. He'd structure it properly. I looked at her. You knew? He talked to me. Of course he did. Luke became irritated. Dad, you have more than enough. That is true. So what is the issue? I don't want to. He blinked. That's it? That's it. You're saying no because I said no to you. Partly. That's vindictive. Maybe it feels that way because you expected a different rule for yourself. I was not sitting on millions when you called. You were sitting on enough. You don't know my finances. Exactly. The table went quiet. You did not ask what I had. You decided your goals mattered more than my emergency. Now you are asking me to reverse that principle because your goal is the emergency. Diane whispered. He's your son. And Brenna is my daughter. No one said she isn't. I turned toward her. You told me to take her wedding money. Diane looked embarrassed. Because she offered. She had not offered when you said it. Brenna's head lifted. What? Diane stared at me. Michael, I looked at my daughter. Your mother told me to ask you before I called Luke. She said you had wedding savings and teachers didn't need a huge wedding. Brenna went very still. You said what? Diane rushed in. I was scared. We needed options. Then why wasn't Luke an option? He was. You told Dad not to bother him. Diane's mouth opened. Luke said, This is between Mom and Dad. Brenna turned toward him. No, apparently my savings were between Mom and Dad too. Madison quietly pushed her chair back an inch. Smart woman. Diane said, Brenna, you gave the money willingly. After Luke refused, that doesn't make him evil. I didn't say evil. Everyone is treating him like some monster because he set one boundary. I almost admired the sentence. A boundary, I repeated. Diane nodded. Yes. Interesting. What? When Luke says no to money, it is a boundary. When I say no, I'm vindictive. Nobody spoke. Eli looked at me and then quickly back at his plate. I continued. When Brenna gave up her wedding, it was family helping family. When Luke kept his money, it was protecting his future. When my land was worthless, it was my failure. When it sold, it became family money. Can anyone at this table explain why every rule changes depending on whose comfort is being protected? Diane began crying. Luke looked angry enough to stand. Brenna looked exhausted. Madison finally spoke. Luke, maybe you should answer. He turned toward her. Stay out of it, she stared at him. You invited me. That ended his momentum. He looked back at me. Fine. I was angry. I've been angry for years. I watched Mom panic over bills. I watched you lose a business. I watched my friends get help from their parents while I had to figure things out myself. You lived with us rent-free for 3 years after college. That's not the point. What is? I never felt safe financially because of you. That was the most honest thing he had said. My anger softened, not my boundary. I believe you. He looked surprised. You do? Yes, I made a risky investment. The business failed. Our life changed. You were young and angry, and I should have understood better how deeply that affected you. Diane wiped her eyes. Luke stared at me. Then why are you doing this? Because understanding why you hurt me does not require me to pretend you didn't. He looked down. When you called me from the hospital, I heard Dad needs money again. I didn't hear Dad is scared. I know. I should have. Yes. I'm sorry. It was not dramatic. No tears, no instant transformation. Just a man admitting one thing without decorating it. I accepted it. Thank you. Then he looked up. Does that change your answer about the 200? I laughed. Brenna laughed too. The first real laugh of the night. Even Madison covered a smile. No. Luke shook his head, almost smiling despite himself. Worth a shot. Diane did not find it funny. So Brenna still gets everything. She does not get everything. She got a house. Yes. Loans. Yes. A car. Also yes. And you think that isn't favoritism? I looked at her. Favoritism is giving one child more because you believe that child matters more. Gratitude is responding to how people actually treat you. Those are not identical. You're buying loyalty. Brenna stood. Mom, stop. Diane looked at her. I am trying to protect you. You don't want money becoming the reason your father turns you against your brother. Dad did not turn me against Luke. You spent years teaching me Luke's goals were important and mine were flexible. The pain in her voice silenced everyone. When Luke needed help after college, he got to live at home. When I needed money for student teaching, you told me to work weekends because it built character. When Luke wanted a condo, Grandma helped and everyone celebrated. When Dad needed surgery, you looked at the $9,000 I saved for my wedding and decided that was the easiest money in the family to sacrifice. Diane whispered, I didn't mean it like that. You never do. That's the problem. Luke stared at his sister, and I could see him realizing the story was older than my surgery. Brenna continued, I gave Dad the money because I wanted to. I would do it again. But I am tired of being praised for being low maintenance, when what everyone means is I am the person easiest to ask to go without. That was the sentence Thanksgiving needed. Not mine, hers. Diane cried quietly. Luke looked down at his hands. I wanted to fix the room. That instinct rose immediately. Tell Brenna everyone loved her. Tell Diane she had done her best. Tell Luke we would work something out. I had spent decades smoothing rough moments because silence after truth made me uncomfortable. I let the silence stay. Eventually, Diane said, I'm sorry, Brenna. My daughter nodded but did not rescue her. Thank you. Then Diane looked at me. And I'm sorry I told you to ask her. Thank you. But I was scared. I know. She waited, probably expecting that to erase the rest. I did not add anything. Thanksgiving ended quietly. Luke helped Eli with dishes. Madison and Brenna talked in the kitchen. Diane sat on the couch looking through old photographs. Before Luke left, he came onto the porch where I was putting on my coat. You really aren't giving me the money? No. Even if the consultancy is solid? Especially then, if it is solid, you can find funding that does not depend on your father. He nodded slowly. Fair. Then he surprised me. I'm glad you didn't die. High praise. I mean it. I know. He hugged me awkwardly. It was the first time he had done that in years. Diane and I did not repair our marriage. Thanksgiving made that clearer, not easier. We had spent too many years becoming roles instead of partners. She was the woman who managed disappointment by attaching herself to our successful son. I was the man who accepted shame because he believed one failed business decision canceled his right to ask for respect. 2 months after Thanksgiving, she moved into an apartment closer to Columbus. We separated without war. No screaming, no public accusations. The strange thing was that once money was no longer the emergency, we finally had to look at the emotional marriage underneath it. There was not enough left. We eventually divorced. I did not hate her. She had stayed through 10 difficult years, even if much of that staying contained resentment. I could honor the effort without pretending the relationship was healthy. Luke did not receive $200,000. He bought into the consultancy anyway 18 months later using a smaller investment, financing, and his own savings. It grew slowly. That was probably better for him. He called me before signing anything and asked what I thought. Not what I would pay, what I thought. I told him the numbers looked ambitious, and he needed a larger cash reserve. He disagreed respectfully. 6 months later, he called and said, "You were right about the reserve." I did not say I told you so. Growth is fragile when someone is learning to ask instead of demand. Our relationship is not perfect, but it is real now. He visits. Sometimes he pays for dinner. The first time he did, I asked if he was sure he could afford it just to irritate him. He told me to shut up and eat my steak. Brenna and Eli married in the community hall exactly as planned. They refused to move the wedding back to the original barn even after I offered. Brenna said, "I like the cheap lights now. They have history." I walked her down the aisle. Diane attended. Luke stood beside me during the ceremony. There was no grand family reconciliation photograph because real families do not resolve themselves for cameras. We simply occupied the same room without asking Brenna to manage our discomfort on her wedding day. At the reception, she danced with me to an old James Taylor song and whispered, "You look less tired." Retirement. Therapy. Also that. She laughed. I retired from the distribution center 3 months after the land sale. My supervisor threw a party in the break room with grocery store cake and a banner that spelled my name, Michael. I loved it. I bought a modest ranch house on 4 acres outside Yellow Springs where I could garden and complain about deer. Nothing extravagant. I restored an old pickup because apparently some men recover from heart surgery by making their backs hurt on purpose. I travel occasionally. I volunteer with a nonprofit that helps older homeowners with repairs they cannot afford. The rest of the money is invested conservatively. Brenna has no automatic claim to all of it. Luke has no automatic claim either. That surprises people when they hear the story, because revenge stories are supposed to end with the good child inheriting everything and the bad child standing outside the gate. Life is more complicated. I gave Brenna significant help because she made sacrifices for me when she had very little. I did not give her ownership of the rest of my life. My will provides for both children, but not equally and not in ways either of them gets to budget today. A portion will support a scholarship for first-generation teachers because Brenna taught me what care looks like on an ordinary salary. Another portion will support cardiac rehabilitation assistance for people who delay treatment because of cost. Luke knows the broad plan. He does not know the numbers. He no longer asks. Brenna tells me to spend more before I die. That is one reason I trust her. The New Albany land taught me something I wish I had understood 11 years earlier. Success does not retroactively make a risky decision wise, and failure does not automatically make the person who took the risk worthless. I got lucky at the end. The contamination cleared. Development arrived. The land appreciated. None of that changes the fact that I overextended myself when I bought it. But none of my mistakes justified 10 years of being treated as though I had forfeited the right to dignity. Families can hold people accountable without reducing them to their worst decision. Parents can disappoint children without becoming permanent villains. Children can set financial boundaries without cruelty. And people can apologize sincerely while still hearing no afterward. The hardest lesson was about Diane's sentence. Ask Brenna. At the time, I heard it only as favoritism toward Luke. Later, I understood it revealed an entire family system. We protected the person who made his needs expensive and relied on the person who made hers small. Luke's ambition was serious because he announced it confidently. Brenna's wedding fund was flexible because she was kind enough to survive without it. My fear was inconvenient because my family had spent years seeing me as the source of problems instead of a person who could have one. That is how capable, forgiving people become invisible. Everyone assumes they will manage. Everyone gives the soft landing somewhere else. Until one day the capable person stops catching everybody. My surgery scar runs down the center of my chest. It has faded from angry red to a pale line. Sometimes I see it in the mirror and think about that hospital parking garage. I remember holding the phone after Luke hung up and feeling less frightened of surgery than I was ashamed of needing help. I wish I could go back to that version of myself and say something simple. Needing someone does not make you a burden. The people who love you may say no sometimes. They may genuinely be unable to help. But love will not make you feel morally defective for asking. Brenna never once asked how quickly I would pay her back. She asked whether I had packed socks for the hospital because apparently that was more urgent. Luke had millions in contracts, moving through his career, and could not see past 10 years of resentment. Diane saw a financial problem before she saw her husband's fear. I saw all of that, and I still choose not to hate them. Hatred is another form of letting people occupy property inside you without paying rent. What I changed was access. Diane no longer gets to define me through the worst year of our marriage. Luke no longer gets to assume my resources are part of his business planning. Brenna no longer gets praised for needing less. I ask what she needs now, even when she says she is fine. And I no longer confuse being useful with being loved. The $4.8 million was never the real reversal. The real reversal happened in a diner before any letter arrived, when a 27-year-old teacher looked at her father and decided a wedding venue was replaceable, but he was not. Everything after that simply gave me the ability to respond to what I had already learned. If the land had remained worthless forever, she still would have been the person who showed up. If Luke had never apologized, I still would have known which boundary I needed. Money did not reveal their character by appearing. Character had already been revealed when I had nothing. The money simply removed everyone's excuses. So tell me honestly, if you needed $7,200 for life-saving surgery and your wealthy son refused because he still blamed you for an old financial failure, while your teacher daughter canceled the wedding she had saved 3 years for to keep you alive, then months later you unexpectedly became wealthy. Would you ever give the son the same financial help you gave the daughter after he sincerely apologized? Or would the moment he chose his resentment over your life permanently change what he could expect from you?